Saudi Arabia is the #1 destination of overseas Filipino workers since the early 70s. The first batch of OFWs were engineers, numbering close to 500, and 40 years later, there are now 600,000 based on DOLE's figures. Other statistics show 1.2 million. And from professionals to workers and domestic helpers, the remittances is the third biggest. And recently, there was a crackdown on undocumented workers. There was a time frame to legalize their permits, but many failed. But because of this, an amnesty was extended until November 3. Now, why are there so many illegal workers in Saudi Arabia? Joining us tonight is Labor Secretary Rosalinda Baldoz of DOLE. Good evening, ma'am, and welcome to NewsLife.
Good evening, and good evening also to all the followers of your program.
Ma'am, just to start us off, how many illegal OFWs are not documented in Saudi Arabia?
When I was there on May 17 to sign the Bilateral Agreement, the registry of those who would like to avail of the amnesty was estimated at around 10,000, 6,000 of which would be in Jeddah, and around 4,000 would be in Riyadh.
Ma'am, now how are they able to fly to Saudi Arabia without any papers and gain work?
There are different circumstances of their going to Saudi Arabia. Some would live on a legal permit, like a working permit or a tourist visa, but they overstayed. And from the time that they overstayed, then they are counted as illegal. There are those who would really leave the country without the necessary document, and for one reason or another, they find themselves in Saudi Arabia. Many of those who would attend this is the annual Mecca Medina pilgrims that carry the so-called Hajj or pilgrim visa, also have the tendency to overstay even after the pilgrims is over. So these are the different types of cases where Saudi Arabia would find some of the Filipinos and other migrant workers to be on illegal status. They could be household helpers. As I said, there could be Filipinos who are just going there to attend the pilgrims. They could be skilled workers and even professionals.
Well, ma'am, now with the good news of the extension, but what happens after November 3 if they're not able to legalize their documents?
I think the November 3 extension should be maximized in terms of past processing of all those who have registered. Because when I was there, as I said, on May 17, the understanding is that those who would be able to submit all the documents for processing will continue to be processed even after July 3. But since there is now an extension after November 3, there should be no reason anymore for any of our illegally staying Filipinos in Saudi Arabia not to be able to submit all the documents and be able to get the exit clearance for those who have to be repatriated, and to get the necessary legal document for those who will be staying there on a legal basis. So we should not, in other words, we should not delay anymore, and we have instructed our labor officials, especially for those who will be staying, because 60% of the 10,000 registered who wants to avail the amnesty before have expressed their desire to stay, and all they have to do is get an employer who is willing to document them, and then they can legally stay.
Ma'am, what kind of assistance can the undocumented OFWs gain from the Department of Labor and the Department of Foreign Affairs or the embassy there?
The one country team approach would always cooperate with each other. Essentially, the undocumented who would want to go home, and these are mostly, some of them are families, and they have violated some so-called religious and cultural laws, which to the Saudi it's not acceptable, and therefore the only way for them to do is to process them and to allow them to exit from Saudi Arabia to repatriation. So normally these cases are handled by the DFA under the Consular Affairs Services and Assistance to Nationals. But for those who would like to stay because they are able to get employers who are willing to document them, then normally it is the Philippine Overseas Labor Offices and our officials who would handle this kind of legalization process.
Ma'am, with regard to the Saudization program or the hiring of Saudi citizens to work and limit the entry of expats to include Filipinos to be hired, has this limited the deployment of OFWs?
We have never felt the impact, the negative impact of Saudization, which has been there for so many decades already. Even the latest, which is the Netakat, simply because many of our workers, because the domestic helpers are not covered by the Saudization, whereas for the rest of the workers, skilled and professionals, they really occupy positions that are really not covered by the Netakat based on their color coding. And even for those who are low skilled, able to transfer to the higher category so that they could also be exempted. The reason behind is because employers would prefer Filipino workers to be the one working in their companies. And they have a way of complying with the quota requirement for the employment of the nationals, and that is they also put them in their payroll, but they are very liberal. They can report for work or not, but for the Filipinos who really serve as the backbone of the operation, they are very critical to the business of the employers there. So they are spared. They are not really affected. I can honestly say that they are not affected by the Saudization, which has been there for a number of years already.
Ma'am, you mentioned that a bilateral agreement has been signed between the Philippines and the Saudi government to protect our domestic helpers. Is this now in effect?
We're still hammering out some procedural guidelines. The technical working group just ended their two-day meeting yesterday. So July 1 and 2, we signed the agreement May 17, and we agreed that some procedural guidelines will still to be jointly worked out. So the Saudi technical panel came over to the Philippines. They concluded their technical discussion yesterday. They have discussed the on-site dispute settlement procedure. They have agreed to reduce the process cycle time to 50%, and that means faster the deployment of our Filipino workers to Saudi. They have agreed to jointly assist us in conciliating cases. We even offered them to train their people on how to conciliate cases. And we gave them 6-month period to test the operations of their mega recruitment agencies, so that we will be dealing with few but very big mega recruitment agencies which are highly capitalized and who are supposed to assume the liabilities of the employers in terms of whatever abuses or violations that our workers will be subjected to. So we are very careful that we should give at least a 6-month period to find out how this new system will operate in terms of the protection that it will give to our overseas Filipino workers.
Ma'am, a couple of days ago you met with Saudi Labor Ministry officials and you discussed commitments. Besides the $400 monthly salary, what other commitments were discussed?
Well, the mega recruitment agencies will have to open bank accounts in behalf of our workers, and this will evidence that they are being paid $400. So we hope that the issue of non-payment or what do you call this, illegal payment or reduction in the payment of salaries would be lessened. They are now entitled to leave during the day, some rest day of an hour, and in a week, 1 day rest day, and therefore the issue of excessive working hours is expected to be reduced. They will be in possession at all times their passport and their ikama, so the the free movement will not be hampered. They can freely communicate now with their families here and with our embassy officials, and therefore any assistance that they will need could easily be communicated. Plus, the Saudi is already operating a 24-hour help desk to assist, to get all the queries, answer them, and provide assistance if needed, including coordination with our embassies. Then, of course, they commit that they will be provided decent accommodation and a vacation leave after the expiration of their contract. And if the employer would want to rehire them, they will give an additional 1 month salary and, of course, the free ticket in going home. So these are some of the benefits which have been there in the past, but since it's simply based on a contract that they do not recognize, but this time, since this is a jointly agreed standard employment contract which is attached to the bilateral agreement that we signed, and this is a government-to-government agreement, then we are looking forward and we expect that this will be implemented together with the agreed detailed procedures on how to make the implementation very effective. By the way, after all the detailed procedures have been agreed upon, I have instructed POA to come out with a Saudi Arabia labor market-specific regulations to cover all the agreed agreements for purposes of faster coordination and effective implementation. The sharing of the database. The other good thing about the negotiation is that the streamlined procedures will be put online, and Saudi Arabia would even fund the cost of developing an online system for purposes of transparency.
Well, that seems very good news, ma'am, and hopefully that will be implemented soon. But on that note, thank you very much for joining us tonight here at NewsLife. That was Labor Secretary Rosalinda Baldoz of the Department of Labor and Employment. Thank you, ma'am, for joining us tonight.
Welcome. God bless.